Have you ever watched the sun rise from your office window, feeling its promise of a new day, and yet sensed nothing but the weight of another day, identical to the last? You know that by the time you reach 65, you will have spent close to half your life in that very chair, hands gripping the steering wheel or the keyboard, mind consumed by quarterly targets, deadlines, and the dull hum of fluorescent lights. Carl Jung warned us that to live like this, to slave away for decades, only to emerge at retirement with nothing to show but a worn-out body and an empty sense of self, is a tragedy of the highest order. Jung wrote, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." What he meant was this: you can spend your best years performing a role, only to find that when the final curtain falls, there is no one left on stage. Think of the man who identified himself so completely as the company man that he never questioned whether his true worth lay in spreadsheets or in the untended passions hidden behind his smoked glass office door. For 40 years, he believed that climbing the corporate ladder meant he was climbing toward a meaningful life. But when he finally stood at the top, in the form of a corner office with a nameplate, he discovered that that view was the illusion. The view inside himself was empty. Every morning, millions of men rise before dawn, not to follow a calling, but to keep a promise. Often a promise they made to a younger self who never asked, "What do I really want from my one brief life?" Instead, they asked, "What does the world expect of me?" The world's answer came in the shape of vocational fairs, parental expectations, peer pressure. We were told, be responsible, get a stable job, provide for your family. And so we did, but rarely did anyone teach us to ask, are these responsibilities mine or merely inherited chains? Jung called this phenomenon the tyranny of the persona, the mask we present to the world, shaped by cultural expectations and familial pressures. A successful attorney might measure his worth by billable hours, believing each client stamped his identity. Yet Jung insisted, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In other words, if you never examine why you chose law, your daily tasks will run you, not the other way around. And when you finally retire, you discover that fate was no grand design, but the blind force of an unexamined life. Imagine a man who, at 22, vowed to follow his father's footsteps into banking. He celebrates every promotion as if it were proof of his own value. At 40, he buys a vacation home he never visits. At 50, he invests in funds that eat his weekends. When he reaches 65, he expects a gold watch and a parade. Instead, he finds a cardboard box containing a pile of stock options, figures he no longer understands. He walks out of the building without a handshake that feels genuine, and the retirement staff hands him a plastic ID badge that expires on his 66th birthday. In that instant, the mask falls away, and he asks, "Who am I if I am not a banker?" Jung insisted that the conscious mind can only absorb so much truth at once. He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." The darkness here is the unlived life, the dreams you silenced to please others. That darkness is not evil. It is potential starved of expression. When you hit the final hour of work, you should not feel a hollow ache. You should feel curiosity, a hunger to explore that inner realm you ignored while forever climbing. The path of individuation, the journey to integrate your unconscious with your conscious self, begins with a single question. What have I denied myself in order to survive? A pilot who flew for an airline for 30 years might realize he never learned free flight. He never felt the wind against his face without the hum of jet engines. He never taught his son how to juggle despite promises, because he was too busy at work. When the last passenger leaves, he wonders if he ever truly soared. Jung would say the sky you chart for others can become a prison if you never allow yourself to taste the freedom of your own breath. To avoid the fate of working until 65, only to discover emptiness, you must first disengage from the hypnotic rhythm of fulfilling expectations. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that privilege is also a responsibility, a daunting one. You must dig through layers of conditioning, social norms, family stories, peer judgments. You must excavate the silent compass that points not to wealth or prestige, but to genuine longing. Begin by observing how many waking hours you spend on tasks you do not value. Watch the news and notice how headlines judge your worth by your spending power. Notice how social media reinforces that judgment with images of success that glow like promises but fade like embers. Jung would call this the collective unconscious whispering, "You are only as good as you can buy or as famous as you can become." Yet he also reminded us that the collective unconscious contains the seeds of liberation, archetypes of the wise old man, the creative spirit, the loving father. If you never hear those seeds, you remain a cog in the machine. Suppose you work 40 hours a week in an open plan office, glued to a screen, with virtual meetings stacked like dominoes. Each ping, each beacon of the calendar, each Slack notification, a tiny nail hammered into your spirit. Yet you worry, if I slow down, I'll fall behind. Jung would tell you that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. So you drown your soul in busyness. When 65 arrives, you realize you never asked your soul what it wanted. You raged through decades to avoid an inner conversation you were certain would end in failure. An essential step is to take small acts of defiance. Start by setting aside 1 hour a week to do nothing. No TV, no email, no meeting. Let your mind wander through silence. Do not reach for your phone. Do not check your calendar. In that hour, you might feel fear, boredom, restlessness. These feelings are not enemies, but signposts. Jung wrote, "Show me a sane man and I will cure him for you." Sanity, he meant, is the refusal to engage with one's own depth. If you find that hour unbearable, it is proof that your inner world is starved. That hour, however painful, is the first step toward awakening. Once you taste that rawness, you might notice a longing for something, maybe to write a single poem, to learn a musical instrument, to mentor a troubled teen. This is the call of your shadow and your archetypes. Your shadow refuses to be ignored any longer. The child archetype whispers, play, discover, learn. The creator archetype urges, make something no one has seen before. The wind archetype, if you let your mind anthropomorphize the seasons, says, change is natural, embrace it. These are voices you have muffled under office memos and appetizer platters at networking events. Jung counsels you to listen. As you age, the urgency mounts. Time is no longer infinite. Jung recognized that confronting your own mortality is the sharpest motivator. It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live. The man who spends his entire life accumulating assets, expecting retirement to be the sweet reward, only to find his years dimmed by regret, knows this fear firsthand. Yet that fear can become fuel. When you realize that those final years may not be enough to chase every buried passion, you strip away the procrastination and begin to act. But what if you've already reached 65 and are standing at your front door with nothing but a gold watch to show for decades of work. Jung would say it is not too late. He insisted, the only journey is the one within. Retirement is not an endpoint, but a recalibrating moment. If you can find a single thread of longing, a memory of childhood joy, a passing thought that used to thrill you, pull on that thread. It may lead you into a labyrinth of fear and uncertainty, but it will also lead you to a treasure, the authentic self beyond societal masks. Consider a man named Julius. He spent 40 years as a civil engineer, designing highways and bridges. He took pride in the safety and efficiency his structures brought to cities. Yet he never sketched for fun, never taught his own child how to draw, never truly let his creative mind breathe outside the constraints of blueprints. At 65, he thought he'd retire to gardening, but even soil felt arbitrary. Then one evening, discouraged, he opened an old sketchbook from college and found a half-finished watercolor of a mountain scene, something he painted at 20 when he hitchhiked through the Alps. Tears welled as he remembered the ecstasy of that summer. The next morning, he offered his wife to take a painting class. At first, his strokes were clumsy. The colors blended awkwardly, but his heart sang. He spent every afternoon in a dusty studio, rediscovering shapes and hues. Within a year, he held a small local exhibition where strangers paid to buy his watercolors. His identity shifted from retired engineer to emerging artist, and though his bank account remained modest, his life became immeasurably richer. Jung described this transformation as the integration of opposites, the coming together of the persona and the shadow. He called it the transcendent function. This occurs when you hold the fear of stepping into your shadow and the longing for authentic creation at the same time. That tension is the crucible from which new values emerge. The retired engineer, by facing his fear of looking foolish with a brush, and by following his nostalgia for art, forged a new self. He no longer feared that his life was over. He recognized that his work and his artistry both came from the same source, his capacity to shape the world. But this path demands vigilance. Jung warned, if you do what you always did, you will get what you always got. A man who retires and immediately sinks into day after day of golf and television, never learning, never growing, essentially chooses the always and always ends up with the same emptiness. Even if he plays a perfect round of golf, the satisfaction lasts only as long as the swing. The deeper hunger for meaning, for self-expression, remains unsated. To guard against that, establish a daily practice of soul check, a time when you ask, what did I neglect today? What unlived piece of myself called softly, but was ignored? You might journal these questions or speak them into a recorder. The form doesn't matter. What matters is that you face the stirrings of your unconscious. Jung wrote, beware that, when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. In this context, the monster is the persona that demands your constant submission. You must not become its slave. And remember that individuation is not a solo mission. You need guides. Jung himself found mirrors in his patients, in dreams, in myths, in art. Seek teachers, friends, books, communities that honor inner work. A philosopher friend can dissect your values. A martial arts master can teach you that discipline of the body and mind, opening doors to inner silence. A therapist can help you navigate the labyrinth of your psyche. Each guide helps illuminate a corner of your unconscious. The retired physicist who once worshipped equations may now study alchemy, the ancient art of transformation, applying its metaphor to his own life, turning the base metal of routine into the gold of authenticity. In the final analysis, working until 65 and ending up with nothing happens because we mistake a role for a soul. Jung's words echo, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That privilege isn't granted by retirement. It is claimed by each moment you choose self-honesty over safety, courage over comfort, curiosity over conformity. A man who at 65 can say, "I spent my best years searching for what makes me feel alive," will never feel empty. He may not have amassed a portfolio of stocks, but he holds treasures, creative joy, relationships deepened by vulnerability, a legacy woven from authenticity. So if you feel the clock ticking toward 65, let these words move you. The work you do when you are 57 matters more than the work you did at 25, because now you can work not for a persona, but for a soul. Let that realization pierce you like a sunbeam. Your life does not end when the paycheck stops. It begins in full color when you stop living a borrowed identity and start living your own. When the day arrives that you walk out of the office for the last time, do not clutch a gold watch as a measure of your worth. Instead, carry a simple prayer. May I be brave enough to become who I truly am. Because that prayer, uttered from the depth of your being, is the only bridge between a life of nothing and a life of everything.